Why are these mysterious vintage photographs still in the public domain? Subscribe urgently so that you don't miss any updates. In this picture we see a group of lumberjacks, presumably from the beginning of the 20th century. Everyone is dressed according to the era: caps, vests, suspenders, typical work clothes of that time. But there is something strange in the center, a huge man with disproportionately massive arms and at least 3 times the height of those around him. He looks almost like a fabulous giant. At first glance, the photo seems real: vintage sepia, correct composition, serious faces. But upon closer examination, it is clear that this is a fake. The photo shows a workshop from the early 20th century, presumably from the 1920s and 1930s. On the right sits a man in a lab coat, most likely a craftsman or an artist. Next to him is a female figure in a light dress, which on closer inspection turns out to be a mannequin. Behind them are shelves with dozens of heads, some with eyes, others without, all with expressions as if frozen in an instant. This is most likely a workshop for making wax figures, theatrical mannequins, or realistic masks for showcases and exhibitions. In those years, such workshops were very common in Europe. They created figures for museums, theaters, and shops. The abundance of details, tools, templates, blanks, indicates the high accuracy of the work. The photo captures a rare and exciting moment from the past. A woman riding 2 horses jumps over a car at once. This is not a montage or a movie production. Such stunts were a real sensation in the show programs of the mid-20th century, especially in American rodeos, circuses, and stunt performances. A woman controls 2 horses by standing on them with her feet, a technique known as Roman riding. The photo shows how focused she is, holding only the reins while the horses synchronously overcome the obstacle. The picture shows 2 humanoid figures standing on a mountain path. One is a giant dressed in furs with a massive head and long arms. The other is a man with a spear who looks like a primitive hunter. Foggy slopes, coniferous trees, and a harsh mountain landscape are in the background. However, this is not the original. The composition, the Bigfoot's anatomy, facial expressions, and lighting all point to modern generation using neural networks. The giant's hair and skin texture are too smooth, and his face is too symmetrical. Even the poses seem slightly unnatural, as if they are assembled from references. What do you think? Write in the commentaries. In the photo is a real engineer of the musical absurdity of the early 20th century. A man in a vest and shirt sits on a raised platform and simultaneously plays a variety of instruments combined into a complex mechanical apparatus. He holds a violin in his hands, his lips are pressed to the trumpet, and his feet set in motion pedals that apparently launch drums, cymbals, and perhaps even organs or automatic hammers on the keys. In front of him is a web of levers, belts, and rods, all assembled manually with engineering precision. This is the so-called one-man band, but on a completely different level. Unlike street musicians with primitive devices, this is the result of obsession and ingenuity. A man doesn't just play music, he controls a whole mechanism, synchronizing his arms, legs, and breathing in a complex system. The photo was probably taken in the 1890s and 1910s. The photo shows a woman in a police uniform from the early 20th century pointing a revolver to the side, as if at the moment of practice shooting. She has a baton in her hand and a distinctive star, the symbol of the sheriff, on her chest. The main thing that catches your eye is an unusual element at the bottom of the dress, a protective grille resembling armor or a movable shield sewn into the skirt. The picture was probably taken in the 1910s and 1920s in the United States or Great Britain, during the period when women first began to receive official police powers. The era of change. Women fought for the right to vote, work, and independence. This photo doesn't just capture the moment of a workout, it's a symbol of progress. A policewoman with a gun and a protective element in her clothes looked like a challenge to the social norms of the time. The photo shows an invention of the early 20th century, created for voice recording. A man in a suit, probably an announcer or an actor, is sitting in front of a bulky wooden device with a huge sound funnel. He holds a sheet of text and reads through a directional speaker. This is a primitive soundproof booth or acoustic amplifier designed for early sound recording. Most likely, the picture was taken in the 1910s and 1920s, when sound was still learning to live outside the human body, before the advent of tape recorders and microphones. The horn amplified the voice by directing it into a mechanical receiver. In fact, into a needle that scratched out sound vibrations on a wax or lacquer plate. The photo shows an elderly man with a long beard, wearing a coat and a cap, sitting at an old telephone switchboard. He holds a handset in one hand and connects a cord to a socket on a wooden panel with the other. In front of him is a massive desktop phone with a metal case and a twisted wire. The picture was taken in the first half of the 20th century, probably in the 1930s and 40s, in Eastern Europe or Russia. This is a scene from an era when telephone communication was not automatic. Such switches manually connected the callers to each other. This person is probably a telephone operator, perhaps in a rural post office or a small town. The whole system was literally based on manual work and the attention of the person sitting at the panel. The photo shows a woman at the entrance to a painted nomadic van, a typical caravan of British Romani gypsies of the early 20th century. She feeds the birds in cages that are hung outside on the front of the van. There are trees and an open area in the background, probably the outskirts of a village or a rural road. Everything around us speaks of movement, life outside cities, on wheels. The van is decorated with carvings and paintings, and the name or inscription "B Pet" is visible on the door, possibly the last name of the owner. This type of van, the Vardo, was not just a vehicle, but a full-fledged home. It's amazing how everyday life, art and freedom combined in a small space. Buckets, steps, crates, small things on the ground, everything speaks about everyday life on the road. The picture dates back to about the 1900s and 1920s. The photo shows a postman from the late 19th century standing on an unusual hybrid of a bicycle and a letter delivery cart. He is wearing a uniform jacket, boots, and a cap with a cockade. There are straps on the back for a bag or backpack. A bicycle is an antique penny, farthing with a huge front wheel, to which is attached a four-wheeled cart with a flat platform loaded with bags, letters, and parcels. There is a boy standing nearby, probably an assistant or just an observer, who is holding a package. The picture was probably taken in the 1880s and 1890s, when the post office was actively developing and there were few vehicles. The photo shows a group of Japanese electricians working at a height above a busy city street. They stand on long ladders mounted vertically directly on the asphalt. Without insurance, hard hats or modern equipment, only skill, balance, and courage. One worker holds onto the wires with his feet, the other leans forward, making connections. Below are watching passers-by, dangling cables, coils, and tools. The picture was taken in Japan around the late 1950s or early 1960s, as evidenced by the style of clothing, street signs, and architecture. This is a time of rapid economic growth of the country, recovery after the war, the era of industrialization and urbanization. The power grid was expanding rapidly, and the work was carried out in extreme conditions, right in front of the eyes of the townspeople. The photo shows a fantastic wooden house standing at a dizzying height, at the very edge of a sheer cliff. The building is supported by a multitude of shaky, intertwined pillars, like a spider web of thin logs hanging over an abyss. The house itself is built in the Victorian style, with a mansard roof, attic windows, and a weather vane, as if torn from the 19th century. It was as if someone had decided to live on the edge of the world, in absolute solitude, where the earth ends. The photo shows a Shell gas station, probably from the 1920s and 30s. In the center of the stage is a man at an antique gas station with a hand pump. The funnel is positioned next to a tiny children's motorcycle, which is fueled by two boys in leather helmets and glasses, like real racers. One of them is sitting at the wheel, the other is turning the crank, with complete seriousness and delight. A motorcycle is not a toy in the usual sense, but a scaled, down copy of a real pedal-powered vehicle. In those years, such models were made manually or in small batches for wealthy families. The refueling itself is typical of pre-war Europe, glass cylinders on top, into which gasoline was poured before draining into the tank, a visual mechanical process. The photo shows the street scene of the early 20th century in the Netherlands. In the foreground is a woman with a baby carriage, and next to her is an unusual cart with a huge flywheel and roof. This is a mobile workshop of a knife maker, or as indicated in the caption, de Scherensleep, a wandering knife and scissors grinder. The man at the machine sharpens the tool by rotating the hand wheel, which drives the grinding wheel through a belt drive. Nearby, two boys are watching and possibly studying. This cart was completely autonomous. It was rolled through the streets, and the flywheel was started manually. creating energy for sharpening. Such artisans moved from town to town, serving the residents right on the streets. The photo shows a large office or classroom from the 1930s and 40s, filled with rows of people at typewriters. Men and women are diligently typing long strips of text on strips of paper that stretch almost to the floor. There is a supervisor or a teacher among them, overseeing the process. The room is well lit, the faces are focused, the hands work quickly. Judging by the setting and the number of equally designed jobs, this is either an exam in shorthand and machine learning, or a production department engaged in mass data processing, perhaps for statistics, censuses, or accounting. Before computers and printers, this was how huge amounts of information were created and copied. What do you think it is? The photo shows an adult man hanging upside down from a large wooden wheel. The wheel is fixed between the trees using a variety of ropes. The man's legs are fixed in the hub, and the body hangs freely. He is dressed in heavy clothes, a jacket, trousers, and boots. All this indicates the beginning of the 20th century. The scene looks like a carefully prepared experiment, trick, or unusual entertainment. In those years, people often staged such demonstrations for the sake of science, physical education, or just attention. The man in the picture remains calm, which indicates control over the situation. The photo shows a scene from an American fair or carnival in the middle of the 20th century, probably in the 1950s and 60s. In the center is a woman in a glass cage, covered with a metal mesh on top. Below is an inscription in large letters: "See her change from beauty to beast. Watch how she turns from beauty into a monster." This is part of the so-called sideshow attractions, sideshows at carnivals, where the audience was offered supposedly miracles, mutations, transformations, and other sensations for a fee. The trick shown in the photo was most likely arranged using lighting, mirrors, or a simple substitution inside the booth. The visitor saw a woman, and then when the light or optics changed, her image seemed to turn into a beast. The photo shows a moment of extreme concentration and bravery. A Jeep, presumably a Willys Jeep or Jeep Wagoneer of the late 1960s and early 1970s, is moving along a narrow mountain path cut directly into the rock. On the left is a sheer wall, on the right is a drop of hundreds of meters. The wheels of the car barely fit on the track, and it seems that one wrong move and it will disappear into the abyss. The photo was most likely taken in the USA, possibly on one of the legendary Colorado trails, like the Black Bear Pass or Imogene Pass. In the photo, a police patrol car from the 1910s and 1920s hovered on the edge of a steep cliff. The car with the inscription Police Patrol is held on the rear wheels at the very edge. 2 police officers remain inside, while the third one is hanging outside, holding on to the front axle. Most likely, this is a staged shot made for a newspaper sensation or advertisement. In that era, stunt photos with elements of danger were popular. They attracted attention and raised circulation. The photo shows an accident on the Chicago City overpass in the 1940s. The carriage of the Skitran with the number 3053 flew off the tracks and hovered over the street. The front of the train is destroyed, the supports under it are broken. Below, there's a crowd of onlookers, cars, and an officer blocking traffic. The scene was shot in the city center, at the intersection of a busy street. The billboard shows the timetable of the Express Train Line 7 train, as well as the inscription 35 minutes to Forest Par, which indicates the Chicago public transport system, the famous Chicago L. The cause of the accident could be a brake system error or speeding at the entrance to the station. Similar cases have been recorded in the history of L, especially in the era before full automation. The photo shows the construction of the Brooklyn Bridge in New York. The picture was taken in the early 1880s, shortly before the completion of the project. In the photo, a group of men in top hats and business suits are standing on a hanging rope leading to the bridge tower. Below is a warning sign: safe for only 25 men at one time. Do not walk close together nor run, jump or trot. Break step. In the background is an unfinished bridge tower with temporary wooden scaffolding. Below is a construction site, coils, blocks and working elements. All of this is part of a grandiose project by engineer John Roebling, which was later completed under the direction of his son, Washington Roebling. The men on the rope are probably engineers, investors, and city officials who staged a symbolic rope walk in honor of reaching the next stage of construction. In the photo is one of the so-called Skywalkers or tricksters of the 1920s, performing a balance at height. A man in a shirt, gloves, and hat holds a horizontal stop on one hand, lying across a beam on the edge of a multi-story building. Below is a busy street in a large American city, probably New York or Chicago. Such photographs were often taken as part of a show, circus advertisement, or newspaper sensation. Holding your body on one hand requires tremendous strength and control, especially when there are dozens of floors below you. The photo shows Moscow, the embankment near the Kremlin Wall, in the middle of the 20th century. Winter, snow covered the pavement and ice bound the Moskva River. In the foreground is the Kremlin's Beklamishevskaya, Moskvoretskia Tower. There are rare cars moving along the road, mostly trucks and official vehicles. People are walking along the snowy sidewalk with their heads down. The frost is severe. The picture was taken by a photographer from the American magazine Life, probably in the late 1940s or early 1950s, during the Cold War. Life often sent correspondents to the USSR to show the Western audience everyday life behind the Iron Curtain. The photo shows a man tied to a pole in the middle of the street, with a sign on his chest, "I resisted police officers." This is a form of public humiliation that was widespread in the 1920s and 1930s in the USSR, especially during periods of severe repression, war communism, or NEP. Such actions were organized for an educational effect, so that others would see an example of punishment and not repeat mistakes. The man stands with his head down, hands tied, legs tied too. There are passers-by, a cart, poor streets all around. Judging by the architecture and clothing, the picture was taken in the south of the USSR, perhaps in the Crimea, the Caucasus, or Central Asia. The photo shows New York City during a snowstorm. In the foreground is a man in a long coat and hat walking along a snow-covered street. In the distance, in the fog and snow, the silhouette of the Empire State Building is barely discernible. The street is almost empty, the cars are standing, the city seems to have frozen. The picture was taken in the 1940s or early 1950s. This is a rare shot in which New York looks not like a megacity, but like a silent, almost apocalyptic landscape. There were no ads, no horns, no crowds, just snow, wind, and a single figure disappearing into the white gloom. The photo shows one of the earliest and most unusual tractors of the 20th century. The huge machine with a metal roof and crawler drive looks like a hybrid of a tractor, tank, and steam locomotive. On the right are massive iron wheels. On the left are powerful tracks. Two men in suits are standing on the platform, which indicates the presentation nature of the picture, probably a demonstration of the invention. The photo was taken around the 1910s and 1920s, at a time when agricultural mechanization was just gaining momentum. This is most likely an experimental machine designed for plowing heavy soils or transporting them to swampy areas. Such devices were created manually by innovative engineers and private companies in an attempt to replace heavy manual labor and horse traction. The photo shows a rainy London street in the 1930s and 1940s. A man in a long coat holds a huge inflatable crocodile over his head. In front of him is a girl in a hat and a raincoat, looking at him in surprise. There is wet asphalt all around, silhouettes of passers-by, a cyclist, a tram in the background. The atmosphere is dense fog, typical of old London. This is not a promotional event or a carnival. Most likely, the man is a salesman who decided to attract the attention of passers-by and children to a new product. The photo shows two chimney sweeps from Riga, the beginning of the 20th century. They are dressed in heavy work suits, with ropes, brushes, and soot on their faces. On their heads are tall top hats, typical for this profession. Behind their backs were bundles of ropes and tools, which they used to clean the chimneys from soot and soot. It was hard and dangerous work. Chimney sweeps descended into narrow smoke shafts manually, without insurance, risking suffocation or getting stuck. Work often began in adolescence. Due to constant contact with soot and limited space, they did not live long. Despite this, chimney sweeps were considered symbols of good luck. Their presence on the street, especially on holidays, was perceived as a good sign. The photo shows London, circa the 1930s. A man in a Santa costume stands on the roof of a truck, holding a toy car above his head. Around him is a crowd of children, looking up with delight. Another man in a goat mask climbs up the stairs to the truck, probably a partner in a mythical assistant costume. Horse-drawn carriages, advertisements, and the architecture of a typical English shopping district can be seen in the background. This is the scene of a Christmas charity event, a common practice in pre-war Britain, when street performances were staged right in the squares to give children a holiday in difficult times. The photo shows a group of men in classic costumes from the early 20th century, posing by a giant stone covered with strange symbols and an image of a multi-armed creature. The picture is made in the style of a documentary archaeological survey, but the stone depicted is clearly fake. On the surface, there are not ancient runes, but stylized signs resembling science fiction or languages from fictional worlds. The central motif is a creature with tentacles or arms surrounded by circles and geometry, which is more like a fantasy in the spirit of Lovecraft or later cryptographers. The signature Banazi on the edge indicates that it is the work of a contemporary artist or visual stylist. The photo shows a pastry shop in Europe or the USA, circa the 1940s and 1950s. A woman and a man in work uniforms decorate giant Easter eggs made entirely of chocolate or sugar. Each piece is handmade: glazed decorations, floral decor, inscriptions, ribbons. These products are not for an ordinary showcase. Most likely, these are elite gifts for shop windows, exhibitions, or notable customers. In the background are dozens of identical boxes, which are probably packed with such eggs for shipment. This indicates an industrial scale, but the manual approach remains in every instance. The photo shows two huge doll costumes standing next to people in ordinary clothes. The picture was taken at the beginning of the 20th century in Europe, probably in France or Spain. These giants are part of a traditional street celebration known as giant dolls or géants processionals. Such figures often depicted kings, knights, warriors, biblical characters, or exotic images, as in this photo, men and women with African features. This is a typical motif of colonial Europe, where images from other cultures were often stylized, exaggerated, and turned into a street spectacle. The dolls were carried on people's shoulders from the inside. Inside there was a frame that allowed the operator to move the figure, take steps, and sometimes even dance. The photo shows an alleged archaeological excavation, where two men are standing next to a giant sword, the length of which exceeds 10 meters. The weapon lies in the ground, as if it was dug out from under a layer of sand. Everything looks like a discovery from mythology, as if we are talking about the battles of titans or ancient giants. But this is a staged image. In fact, archaeology has not recorded such finds. A snapshot is part of a digital or artistic project in which fantasy is stylized as an archaeological discovery. The image was probably created using 3D graphics, a photo editor, or a real layout taken from the desired angle. The photo shows a rare historical snapshot of a suspended railway carriage on an experimental monorail line. An unusual type of running gear is shown, a massive metal chassis with two wheels mounted on top of a rail. This is one of the early attempts to develop a suspended railway. The photo was published in Life magazine, probably in the 1930s and 40s, when such engineering experiments were actively covered. Similar designs have been tested in Germany, the USA, and the UK, mainly as part of attempts to create urban transport of the future that would not interfere with street traffic. The photo shows a street bread vendor standing next to a wooden cart full of fresh rolls and loaves. The picture was taken at the beginning of the 20th century, probably in Paris or Lyon, a typical urban backdrop of France at that time: a narrow street, closed shutters, stone pavement. The cart is simple but functional, with wooden wheels, a counter, and wicker baskets for storing bread. Everything is handmade, no frills. The woman is dressed modestly, a tight apron, a long skirt, and her hair is tucked away, an image familiar to workers or widows who earn money by trade. The photo shows a demonstration of group hypnosis, probably from the 1940s and 1950s. The man in the suit standing on the left is a hypnotist. He holds his hand over the woman's head, and the rest of the participants are already immersed in a trance. Their heads are lowered, their bodies are relaxed, their facial expressions are absent. Everything points to a public session, perhaps as part of a show, a scientific demonstration, or a therapeutic practice. In the middle of the 20th century, hypnosis became a fashionable topic in the USA and Europe. It was studied at universities, used in psychotherapy, and used in mass performances. The photo shows an advertising car in the form of a package of Lifesavers mints, passing along the street of an American city. The picture was taken in the 1930s, an era when creative advertising on wheels began to actively capture the attention of the public. The car is made on the basis of a standard chassis, but is completely covered by a cylindrical body, imitating a branded jar with the inscription Peppermint Lifesavers. Such cars were part of large-scale marketing campaigns. They participated in parades, promotional tours, and exhibitions. Their task is not just advertising, but a visual shock, a memorable image against the background of monotonous streets. The photo shows a street promo from the mid-1940s, dedicated to the release of a film or performance featuring the living mermaid. A girl in a mermaid costume is inside a glass aquarium filled with water, posing in front of the camera in front of an amazed audience. The inscription on the aquarium reads, "The premiere at the Paradise Theater is the film The Man and the Mermaid," which highlights her promotional role. Shows like this are part of the golden era of street marketing in the United States. Their task is to instantly attract attention and cause a stir. The photo shows a Christmas shopping scene in New York in the late 1920s, probably around 1927 to 1929. A woman in a fashionable cloche hat and a fur collar watches her companion, barely visible because of the giant stack of boxes and gifts he holds. The man is completely hidden behind a pile of packages. His legs and arms are the only thing visible, except for a toy stroller hanging from the edge. The photo shows a rare and vivid moment of a winter day in Los Angeles in January 1949. It was one of the few snowstorms in the history of the city, and it caused genuine delight among the locals, who were unaccustomed to such a phenomenon. For girls in neat dresses and heels, in the fashion of the late 1940s, happily make snowballs right on a busy city street. Instead of snowdrifts, there are antique car bodies dusted with snow. There are cinemas, hotels, signs all around, and the whole atmosphere resembles Hollywood scenery, but this is a real street and real snow. The girls' gaze is cheerful, competitive, as if they had temporarily forgotten about the usual hustle and bustle of the city. The image shows a clearly staged and fake scene, stylized as ancient Egypt. In the center is an alleged Egyptian holding a huge stone block above his head, which in reality would weigh several tons. There are men in loincloths, a crowd, and pyramids in the background. In the photo, 3 men are painting a wooden roller coaster structure. One of them stands high on a support and paints a sign with the inscription "Down," obviously a warning to visitors of the attraction. The second one paints the side of the track, and the third one applies paint directly to the wooden rails along which the trailers should move. Judging by the clothes and the quality of the picture, the photo was taken around the 1930s in the USA. This time is the heyday of wooden roller coasters, especially in parks like Coney Island or Lakeside. The sit-down sign suggests that the slides were fast, moving and unsafe to stand on, a simple but important reminder in an era when safety standards were just being formed. The photo shows 4 smiling women in pantsuits, happily waving their hands, sitting astride a miniature steam locomotive. The inscription DMR is on the tender, and the number No. 2 foot is on the cabin of the locomotive. Judging by the style of clothes, hairstyles, and the quality of the picture, the photo was taken in the 1930s, probably in the UK or the USA. This is not an ordinary train, but part of an attraction, a children's or entertainment railway, popular in parks and resort areas of those years. Similar mini-steam locomotives were created with operating coal-fired furnaces, but everything was scaled down. The photo shows a rare historical vehicle, a camel cart with a covered body, taken approximately at the end of the beginning of the XX century, presumably on the territory of India or the British Protectorate. This is a typical scene for rural Asia at that time. A camel harnessed to a hand-built wagon is pulling a passenger van with a wooden frame and a roof covered with fabric or a mat. Inside the cart is a man, apparently the owner or the coachman, holding the reins. Behind the background, you can see the architectural decor with elements of Oriental style, probably a carved arch or part of the city fence. This transport was analogous to a stagecoach or bus in regions where horses were less adapted to the climate and desert conditions. Camels coped better with the heat and rough terrain. Such carts were used to transport families, officials, merchants, and travelers between villages and towns. This photo shows a steam barge with a group of men, taken in the USA in the second half of the 19th century, presumably in the 1870s and 1890s. This is one of the rare images that capture the everyday life of those times when waterways, especially canals and rivers, were the main artery for trade, travel, and transportation. In front of us is a flat-bottomed steamboat typical of shallow rivers. It is powered by a small steam boiler installed at the back. The main room is a cabin, which at the same time served as a place of rest, navigation, and sometimes even a kitchen. The people in the picture are probably a mix of workers, mechanics, and passengers. Their clothes speak about the time: top hats, bowler hats, vests, and jackets. All this is typical of the post-last stage of the industrialization of America. The photo shows the bank of the Jarlot River in the city of Morlaix, France, Brittany. The picture dates from the late 19th, early 20th century, and captures the usual urban lifestyle for that time: laundresses at work. Women in caps and dark clothes wash clothes right on the embankment, bent over baskets and water. It was a daily scene in many European cities before the advent of plumbing and washing machines. Lavius's laundresses worked from morning to evening. Some did it for their own families, others for a fee. The stones on the embankment are smooth from frequent contact with soap, water, and time. Pay attention to the architecture. Houses made of local stone with steep roofs and shutters are typical of northwestern France. This archival photograph shows two actors in theatrical costumes of the chivalric era, sitting on an artificial wooden horse mounted on a wheeled platform. The picture dates from the late 19th, early 20th century, and judging by the design and nature of the posing, was taken in a studio, probably for advertising or archival purposes of a stage production. The object is wheeled, which means it was supposed to move around the stage. This is typical of theatrical processions and pantomimes of that era. A man with a sword and chainmail and a cape depicts a hero or a king. The woman with long curls is probably a princess or a lady of the heart. The photo shows a street flower stand on wheels parked on the sidewalk in front of a building with the inscription Uni, probably the name of a store, cafe, or pharmacy. The picture was taken in the Netherlands in the 1950s. This is evidenced not only by the architecture, but also by the style of men's clothing: knee-length coats, felt hats, plastic, rimmed glasses, a typical European look of the post-war decade. The kiosk is a glazed trolley with flowers, protected from wind and precipitation. A basket with branches on the roof is a visual accent and possibly an additional product. An inscription with an address and a phone number is visible above the rear wheel, confirming that we are looking at a full-fledged small business, probably a family business. It is noteworthy how neatly the counter is decorated. The showcase is cut diagonally so that it is convenient for a passerby to see the goods from the sidewalk. The photo shows a building with a catchy sign: the House of Nonsense, House of the Absurd. It was one of the most popular forms of entertainment at the beginning of the 20th century, especially at English and American fairs and embankments. Judging by the architecture and style, the picture was taken around 1910 to 1925, most likely in the UK. The facade of the building is decorated with slogans that reflect the essence of what is happening inside. The ticket cost 6 pence for adults and 3 pence for children, indicating that entertainment was accessible to the general working-class public. It was not a traditional theater or circus. Inside there could be mirror labyrinths, rotating rooms, optical illusions, laughter rooms, fallen stairs, scenes with wigs, overturned furniture, and people acting out absurd scenes. Everything is in the spirit of burlesque, Victorian humor, and light satire. The photo shows a woman in an unusual costume made entirely of cabbage leaves. The picture was taken in the UK, probably in the 1930s, as evidenced by the style of shoes, the style of clothing, and the architecture behind the back. Such a costume is not an accident. This is a typical example of a rural harvest festival, fair, or costume contest, which were especially popular in British villages in the first half of the 20th century. People created outfits from vegetables, fruits, and flowers to have fun presenting their farm, participating in an originality contest, and possibly winning a prize. Sometimes such costumes were used for charitable purposes, to raise funds for hospitals or churches. The photo captures a scene from the era of the beginning of road trips, around the 1920s and 1930s. In front of us is a family car turned into a makeshift mobile home. Judging by the number, the shape of the wheels, the body, and the details, this is one of the modifications of the Ford Model T, the car that made mass motorization in the United States. The car is equipped with a canopy. The rear part has been converted into housing, with laundry hung for drying and an improvised kitchen on a pull-out board. A man cooks a meal, and a woman may be holding a notebook or a book. It can be a cookbook, a travel diary, or a list of supplies. Everything points to a long journey. A table, dishes, clothes, a leisurely rhythm. Such families called themselves auto-travelers and led a nomadic lifestyle, often in search of work, a better life, or just adventures. The photo shows a unique machine from the past, a steam-powered a musical instrument powered by steam, mounted on a self-propelled platform. It belonged to a museum in Stratford, Ontario, Canada, and judging by the inscriptions, was the first steam organ of its type in the region. Similar machines were used in circuses, fairs, and processions to attract attention with loud noises audible from miles away. The instrument is powered by steam. Each pipe emits a sound when a jet of hot steam passes through it. These pipes are essentially wind organs, and they play automatic or manual music. This installation was transported on wheels. It could be attached to a steam tractor or a horse. The man sitting on the side was most likely a technician or operator. Such units required skills not only in music, but also in controlling pressure, temperature, lubrication, and safety. The photo was probably taken in the 1940s and 1950s, judging by the quality of the image, clothing, and cultural context. The photo shows a scene reminiscent of the second half of the 19th century, possibly the 1870s and 1890s. A woman in a Victorian dress with a tourniquet, gloves, a hat and a travel bag stands against the background of a massive steam locomotive, ready to depart. Light steam seeps out of the valves, and metal rivets, and pipes betray the power of the engineering era. The lady is a typical representative of the middle or upper class of that time. Her outfit doesn't just show off her status, it also protects her from road dust and cold. Such scenes were common to major railway hubs in Europe and North America during the heyday of steam locomotives. What do you think is happening in this photo? Write about it in the comments and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the daily content.